I'm Keija. I'm going to talk about my childhood in Saudi Arabia. So think of your hometown, the place of your provenance. When people ask you that simple question, where are you from, you say this place. Perhaps it is where you were born or where you spent your childhood. Perhaps it is a place where you still have kin. You give your answer without thinking. It is part of the narrative of you. When my grandpa Floyd boarded the plane bound for Saudi Arabia with his wife and daughter in 1951, he likely didn't think about hometowns or roots. He was an Iowa boy for whom the word hometown was an epithet, a place to remain only until he was old enough to go to California. And from California, after marrying my grandmother with a ring meant for another woman, he fled further on to Arabia with all its mystery and promise of fortune. In Dhahran, the residential compound of the fledgling Arabian American Oil Company, he and his family lived like pioneers with the rest of the oil workers from Texas and Oklahoma. Occasionally, they made trips outside the perimeter fence of the compound to the nearby town of Al-Khobar, which was then a dusty fishing village slowly awakening to the influx of foreigners demanding vegetables and Coca-Cola and milk. My mother was 4 years old when her family landed at Dhahran Air Base, and so she treated Dhahran as any child would, as home, a place to be from. The heat, the desert, the streets names for towns scattered along the Gulf Shore, the flimsy cookie-cutter company houses, all of these things settled comfortably in her child consciousness. The Libyan author Hisham Matar says some of our most powerful memories are those you accumulate when you are very, very young. I know my mother would agree, for Saudi Arabia is still powerfully imprinted in her mind. When my mother was a senior in college, her parents announced they were leaving Arabia, retiring, and moving back to California. Devastated at the thought of leaving the only home she could remember, she took a semester off to go back to the kingdom in order to let the country settle further in her bones and blood. She was greedy for the place because she knew that when the government voided their visas, there would be no returning. My mother's a resourceful woman, though. She found a way back in my father, a doctoral student who wanted to live in the Middle East as much as she did. They spent their honeymoon in Lebanon as my father finished his PhD at the American University of Beirut. They lived in a drafty, grapevine-draped villa in Beysur, where one evening they watched an airplane shot out of the sky, its pilot parachuting down and landing outside the nearby village. The year was 1974. Hearing the drumbeat of war growing louder, my parents packed up and left the villa. Not wanting to return to the States, Dad took a job as a professor at the University of Petroleum and Minerals, near Dhahran. Mom had found her way home. My sister was born in 1977, and I came along in 1980, born jaundiced in Khobar's As-Salama Hospital, where they put me in a cardboard box under a heat lamp to cure me. I was black-haired and dark-eyed, so that my father thought the nurse had made a mistake and swapped his baby out. He called me his Bedouin baby, a nickname I loved, because, like my mother, I wanted so much to be part of the place I knew as home. We lived at P304 Prairie View, minutes from where my mother had spent her girlhood, and thousands of miles from anything resembling a prairie. Like her, I rode horses along the perimeter fence and biked the streets bearing the names of Saudi towns, and slept over with friends who lived in company houses whose floor plans perfectly mirrored that of our home. Unlike many Americans, we also ventured off the compound to the homes of Saudi and Arab friends. In college at USC, my parents had been part of a raucous social group of Saudi students, many of whom now lived close by in Khobar. My siblings and I swam in their pools and raced around with their children. As a child growing up here, I had no sense of us versus them. With my friend Lisa and her family, I often ventured into the desert for winter camping trips. Once she and I wandered far from camp in search of some kind of flora or fauna in what appeared to be an entirely dead place. For a terrifying moment, we lost our bearings, the desert uniform from horizon to horizon. We felt the power of the country's unforgiving geography. My best memories of Saudi center around Half Moon Bay, the expat beach on the Arabian Gulf. There, Lisa and I dodged fat white jellyfish that skulked in the water and floated on our backs in the salty sea, staring into a perpetually rainless sky. We climbed the massive dune at the end of the beach, then galloped down to throw ourselves into the Gulf over and over again. My mother contracted a brain infection and had to fly to the States for treatment. In the summer, my father joined her, we kids staying behind with friends. When Saddam invaded Kuwait, my siblings and I were in the air, flying out of Saudi to join our parents for a short vacation. Saddam had other ideas, though. We didn't return to Saudi until March of '91, after Desert Shield and Storm had passed. Soon thereafter, it was my turn to hoard memories of Arabia. My parents announced they had planned to leave the country in July of 1992. I had one last party at Half Moon Bay where I practiced my forlorn look in hopes that my parents would change their minds. They didn't, and we packed and moved to Austin, Texas, where I enrolled in 6th grade. When people asked me where I was from, I said Saudi Arabia. But then things started happening that infringed on my gilded memories of my childhood. First, in 1996, radicals bombed an apartment building in Khobar that housed American military personnel, left over from Desert Storm. Then in 2001, 15 Saudis flew themselves into the Twin Towers. My countrymen, I remember thinking naively. Why would you do this? I realized how little I understood about the relationship between America and Saudi Arabia. Now certain memories took on a sinister quality. The men with machine guns who guarded the compound, the 12-foot-tall barbed wire fence that enclosed Dhahran, the F-16 fighter jets that flew drills overhead day and night. My idyllic childhood grew tainted in my mind as I considered the fraught politics behind it. In 2003, my father returned to Saudi Arabia to work. I was living in New York City, where even the daily commute was harrowing. See something, say something, posters read, urging passengers to report suspicious people and packages. It was a time of fear and paranoia. Meanwhile, in Saudi, radicals had kidnapped and beheaded Paul Johnson, the American contractor, and had taken over a luxury compound in Khobar, less than a mile from my father's less luxurious compound. I thought of my 6'3" blue-eyed, half-Finnish father, and out of a sense of fear and dread, and with a desire to control his story and keep him safe, I started writing a book. That book, The Ruins of Us, will be published by HarperCollins in January. Writing it allowed me to research my birthplace, to learn more about its history and the American-Saudi relationship. I no longer tell people I'm from Saudi Arabia. I understand now that I have little claim on the place. I don't speak the language and don't have citizenship. What I do have, what I'll always have, is an abiding love for and fascination with the country of my childhood.